Nazis were watching on, intrigued, and they thought, this is rather interesting. Hitler will back the IRA if it can prove itself able to defeat the Brits.
Switzerland is like the neutral country of all neutral countries. So we kind of just see that word and think, oh, well, they just sell it out.
The German and Japanese embassies both remain open in Ireland, which creates an obvious security threat. They have this phrase, England's difficulty is our opportunity. And this very much was the idea behind collaborating with the Nazis. In July of 1939, 2 U-boats are sent to Iceland to link up with Gestapo agents in Reykjavik and to go on to Ireland with funds and weapons. In mid-1940, Seán Russell, he's given 3 months of Abwehr training. He was wrapped in a swastika flag before being buried at sea.
We've also got that full kind of frontal assault, full-blown war aspect to it, and then you've got the more shady sabotage kind of aspect to it, which is the same for all sides in the war as well, in every single war. Welcome to episode 3 of the Echo Changer podcast with myself, Jacob.
And myself, Harley.
And now today, we're going to be taking a slightly different turn to the last episode, where I delved a bit deeper into kind of the Axis powers and Finland's involvement in World War II, but I'll let Harley take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to be also looking at the Axis powers, but in a slightly different context, and I'll lead you there in a roundabout way with a present day anecdote. So, as many of you will be aware, Kneecap, the Irish hip hop group, have been in the news recently. Now, they are most famous for their quite radical kind of IRA statements. That is their kind of thing. The DJ of the group, DJ Provi, has often wears a balaclava with the Irish colours on. So they build that kind of terrorist chic, if you like, into their aesthetic. Anyway, recently they're in the news, brought up for terrorism charges over displaying a Hezbollah flag at a November 2024 gig. And as many people also saw, they were at Glastonbury, although rather you wouldn't have seen it on TV because the BBC had actually decided not to show them, anticipating the controversy that they would bring. But anyway, and of course we saw Bob Villan brought the controversy instead with his death to the IDF chant, as well as sprinkling a little from the river to the sea in there at the end. And there was a big debate about whether the BBC should have pulled the plug, etc. I don't think personally they should have. I think freedom of speech and all the rest of it. But anyway, it got me thinking about the connection between these two self-described resistance movements, the IRA and Hezbollah, and the broader kind of Palestinian alignments with Hamas, etc. And I thought, okay, it rang a kind of bell when Jacob and I were discussing World War II and what are we going to talk about. And I thought, okay, and there's something that's ringing a bell here. What is that? Couldn't quite remember. And then I thought, oh yes, the thing that connects the IRA and the Palestinian and broader Arab powers in the Second World War is a collaboration with the Nazis. And for full disclosure, I do have some slightly whiffy fascist characters in my own family history, so I'm not trying to use this as any kind of big political statement. I would be aware of hypocrisy on that and all the rest of it. I'm not trying to say anything like that. So,
and I would also just say, to that point as well, I think when we were talking about how nuanced kind of positions of different countries and entities during World War II was, this is another example of that. And I think it's never cut and dry. It's never black and white when it comes to global conflicts. There's always a lot of powers at play, lots of things to consider as well. So that's a good
So I'll preface it with that, just so that it doesn't seem like I'm trying to do anything kind of clever with anything modern day about this. I'm really not. I'm purely interested in that. But it was nevertheless an interesting present day connection that made me think. I also saw as well on a woman called Myriam Francois, who's a Palestinian activist, an Irish-French Palestinian activist, was interviewed recently on Novara Media with Ash Sarkar, and again was drawing these connections between Irish oppression and Palestinian oppression. So it's just something that made me think about it. Anyway, I'm going to start us off with the connections between the IRA and the Nazis. So, before the war, in January of 1939, there was a sudden uptick of IRA violence. And in the following year, all the way up to March 1940, there were 290 bombing attacks on English infrastructure. So primarily military targets, so utilities, electrical plants, all of that kind of stuff. It's not a set of civilian attacks, although without intending to, 7 civilians were killed and 96 injured through the natural kind of rough and tumble of such attacks. And this became known as S-Plan, S being for sabotage. This is how the British would come to term it. 66 terrorists were arrested. 1,500 sticks of gelignite were confiscated. However, the bombing continued. So obviously, it goes without saying this was attributed to the IRA. They took responsibility for it. This was a directly IRA campaign. And over the water, the Nazis were watching on, intrigued, and they thought, this is rather interesting. I wonder if these are people we can work with. So yeah, and in the lead up to the war for the Nazis, any kind of anti-British terrorism network would obviously present a great boon to them. So they know of this guy called Oscar Faus, who is established as a fundraiser in America amongst the American Nazi Party. He speaks very, very good English. He seems to be a good guy for them to send to Ireland to start to get some of this stuff going. So upon his return to Germany in 1938, he is recruited by the Abwehr. That's the military intelligence that Germany has. He's sent to Ireland to connect with the IRA and to establish the feasibility of any possible cooperation. He meets a man called Seán Russell, who at that point is head of the IRA, as well as Seamus O'Donovan, euphemistically known as the Director of Chemicals, which translates as Chief Bomb Maker, both of whom were architects of the aforementioned S-Plan. Interestingly, winding the clock back 30 years, or rather 20 years at this point, I should say, they were both key players, along with Eamon de Valera, in the IRB, which was the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the direct forerunner to the IRA, during the Easter Rising of 1916. And unlike 15 of their brethren, upon being arrested, they were spared execution without trial. The British reprisals for Easter 1916 were pretty brutal indeed, but these three escape execution. So Russell had written to the Nazi ambassador in Washington as early as 1936, offering IRA support in any future Anglo-German war. And his appointment as the head of the IRA had triggered resignations from many key members who had opposed his cultivation of the Nazi connection as being very distasteful indeed. The IRA are very much thinking pragmatically. We were talking before about the whole "my enemy's enemy is my friend" thing. As with all of these, it's a question of pragmatism. So they have this phrase: "England's difficulty is our opportunity," and this very much was the idea behind collaborating with the Nazis. So Seán Russell, just to show the extent to which this really was not a kind of alignment of fascist ideologies or anything like that, Seán Russell had actually made an attempt in 1925 to cultivate the Soviets to the same end. That didn't really go anywhere, but it shows that this was not an ideological connection, it purely a pragmatic one. However, there are others that argue that at the time, as all across Europe and certainly in Britain as well, there was a strong vein of fascism running through Irish republicanism. So there's a kind of debate about the extent to which Seán Russell was ideologically keen on Nazism or whether he was just being pragmatic.
Well, I think also to that point, you could probably also link the rise of fascism across Europe.
Yeah, of course.
As well as like a driving faction. Like, it wasn't a unique case in that sense. There were rising kind of fascist and nationalistic movements across the continent and the world as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, naturally. So, there's a debate about that. But as we saw, whatever his motivations were, it was controversial enough within the movement that several other leaders resigned as a result. So anyway, if we go to O'Donovan, who was the director of chemicals, the chief bomb maker, he actually makes 3 trips to Germany in 1939 to train with the Abwehr. He's always escorted by this guy, Oscar Faust, that I mentioned, and he's given the code name Agent Hero by the Nazis. At the third of these meetings, the third and final meeting in August, a man called Joseph McGarrity is seen with the pair, and he is an Irish-American fundraiser for the IRA and is thought to have actually provided the monies that funded the S-Plan. O'Donovan returns with a Marconi transmitter, a code for Nazi contacts, as well as a message from the Abwehr, which read that Hitler will back the IRA if it can prove itself able to defeat the Brits. Unfortunately, for the IRA, they quickly proved themselves unable in helping to defeat the Brits because they couldn't work the radio. It took them so long to connect to the Abwehr, ultimately they failed to reach them at all, that Eamon de Valera of 1916, who we recently spoke of, who is now the Taoiseach of Ireland, his secret service, the G2, tunes in and detects them. At this point, De Valera's got quite an ambivalent relationship with the British. He kind of blows hot and cold throughout the war. There's moments where he's more leaning towards cooperating with the Brits. There's moments where he's quite staunchly against them, and there's moments where he kind of flirts with Nazism, but ultimately doesn't really go down that road. So anyway, to the extent to which he does, a really important way in which he does cooperate with the British is to partner G2, that security service, with MI5 in 1939. So another expression of his ambivalence is obviously and indeed independence. He wants to establish his independence, his sovereignty, is to declare neutrality, which causes British anger, because the German and Japanese embassies both remain open in Ireland, which creates an obvious security threat. We can compare on this front in Spain, the German embassies, which were very much up and running in quote unquote neutral Spain, which was, well, as we all know, was very much cooperating. Axis leaning, shall we say, is a kind way of putting it. And we know that King Edward VIII, the quote unquote traitor king, do read Andrew Loney's biography. It's very, very good. Was passing messages to the Nazis through the embassy in Spain that would remarkably information that would play against his own country. So he does indeed earn the title of traitor king. Anyway, so along with that, Ireland refuses Britain the use of Southern Irish ports, which were critical before the war for keeping Britain supplied with food and various other things. So, coupled with botched early bomb attempts, along with the Marconi radio debacle, we're off to a little bit of a shaky start, it could be said. One bomb that was intended to go off at 2:30 a.m. in fact went off at 2:30 p.m. And killed 5 people when, of course, the intention was that everybody should be safely asleep in their beds. So that was a little bit of a screw up. The man given the task was supposed to set it for midnight, and in fact set it for midday, or rather set it at midday. Not a great start.
No.
So in July of 1939, 2 U-boats are sent to Iceland to link up with Gestapo agents in Reykjavik and to go on to Ireland with funds and weapons. They're intercepted later on, and a German naval officer admits to his MI5 captor that a submarine had docked with assistance from Irish fishermen on the south side of Belfast Bay, with a great many explosives from Hamburg, as well as a large sum of cash in £10 notes. So Sean Russell travels back to America to garner further support for the IRA and leaves the rather erratic and prone to drink Stephen Hayes in charge. And under Hayes's somewhat more explosive, shall we say, leadership, on 6th of February 1940, there are simultaneous bomb attacks in Manchester, Birmingham and London, which are civilian focused. This rather puts the Nazis off. They think this is not a strategic move. This is simply terror for terror's sake, and a clear indication that the IRA is pursuing more sort of personal grievances rather than attacking the military targets which they wanted them to.
Which is also, I feel like, is quite an interesting perspective that that's something that bothered them, considering the other stuff that they were doing.
Well, quite. But I think they've always got their eyes on the prize in terms of how can we defeat the British, and a kind of spray of violence that doesn't really
achieve
anything other than just killing civilians is not really is not really going to help them.
Yeah, for sure.
So they send interestingly an ex-circus strongman called Ernst Weber Droll in a little dinghy. You can picture that one. Yeah, a great image. With $1,500 in cash, a much more powerful radio transmitter than the previous Marconi. And a message telling the IRA to stop bombing civilians and to return the attacks to purely military and industrial targets. The IRA complies with this request and shows flexibility in its response. It tries another tack, which is to send a plan via their man Oscar Faust to Berlin, and the plan is named Plan Kathleen. It proposes a German invasion of Northern Ireland. Aside from being quite clever in the way in which it mapped out how the forces, once they had landed, would in fact progress through Northern Ireland, it failed utterly to consider the existing British fortifications, and in this regard was hopelessly underbaked and doomed to fail. On the 5th of May 1940, a Heinkel plane is spotted flying over the Irish Republic, piloted by Herman Gortz, who is known as the Flying Spy, with the code name Gilka. He's on a reconnaissance mission to both scope out the terrain and make contact with the IRA. Unfortunately for Gilka, he drops 80 miles south of the border, despite aiming for Northern Ireland, and walks 5 days to meet his handler, still wearing his German uniform.
Minor misalignment there on what he was doing.
He's just a little bit shy of the target there, but he is quite impressive nevertheless that he managed to trek for 5 days with all of his gear, but that he managed not to be detected in his full dress Nazi uniform. But an interesting side note to this is that the Irish, when they're picking their style of uniform in the Second World War, actually opt for quite a Germanic looking uniform. When you look at footage and maybe we can put some up.
Yeah, we'll put a couple of images up
of the Irish soldiers. They do. You wouldn't really, you'd initially think they were Nazi soldiers. It is very Germanic looking. So perhaps you could say that Gortz is kind of lent to kind of cover of darkness in that regard.
Well, yeah, he's not going to be moving around in the middle of the day. Let's be real.
Or if he is, he was sensible enough not to be detected. Anyway, so Gortz, when he finally gets to his handler and looks over Plan Kathleen, he realises it's deeply, deeply flawed, and he thinks he sends back a message saying that the IRA are hopeless dreamers, completely lacking in strategic know-how. The Irish police raid his safe house whilst he is out. They seize Plan Kathleen as well as his belongings. He catches wind of the fact that the police have discovered him, and so escapes. But Plan Kathleen is very much considered dead in the water at this point. It's been discovered. That's the end of that. In its place is a thing called Operation Green or Operation Dove, depending on who you're reading. In mid-1940, Sean Russell is wined and dined in Brandenburg before witnessing German explosives training in action. He's given 3 months of Abwehr training himself and put up in great style, given the diplomatic privileges of a chauffeur-driven car and a plush villa. Treatment, as we will come to see later on, that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem also received upon his stay in Nazi Germany during the war. He's briefed on Operation Mainau, which is a kind of pre-plan, to parachute an agent into Ireland to set the whole thing running. He's introduced to von Ribbentrop, who assigns a man named Edmund Wesenmeyer to oversee the new plan for invasion, again, Operation Green or Dove. And it very much dovetails, no pun intended, with Operation Sea Lion, which, as we all know, is the ultimately unmaterialized but quite scary plan to invade Britain.
Yeah, which obviously would not have really been successful in any universe that we can cook up.
No, the Germans
feel not really.
Yeah. Despite having a very strong, the Luftwaffe being very, very strong and putting up a good fight in the Battle of Britain. Even had they succeeded, the Germans just did not have the naval control, the naval power to be able to successfully launch an amphibious
invasion.
Even to
invade and then hold occupation of the UK. So
yeah, quite.
So yeah,
exactly. So anyway, Russell takes this plan. He hops aboard a U-65 submarine, which sets off for Ireland. Although he soon, unfortunately, falls ill. With violent vomiting fits and dies from a burst stomach ulcer. Very unpleasant indeed. Only 100 miles out from County Galway, so he nearly made it home, but didn't quite get there in time. The legend has it that he was wrapped in a swastika flag before being buried at sea. Now, this isn't necessarily proof that he himself was any kind of card-carrying Nazi at this point, merely that it may have been German protocol, probably was, to, when at sea, to wrap them in the colours before sending them off to their watery graves. So, nevertheless, an interesting image. His travelling companion, Frank Ryan, returns to Germany, and the whole Green Dove plan is cancelled. At this point, Stephen Hayes takes over fully as the head of the IRA. And winding back a little bit to February 1940, 119 terrorists have at this point been deported back to Ireland. The IRA Abwehr links have been publicised, and Britons are put on alert. An IRA safe house is established in London, along with links to an IRA Abwehr courier in Brussels for IRA saboteurs. So they're very much aware that the whistle has been blown, and they're trying to keep undercover,
low profile. I mean, I also find it quite interesting that this obviously took place quite early on in the war, when we're thinking about like the conflict kind of opening up in 1939 and kind of how that played out across Western Europe, especially with the annexation of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Benelux, and then France as well. But obviously, we've also got that full kind of frontal assault, full-blown war aspect to it, and then you've got the more shady sabotage kind of aspect to it, which is the same for all sides in the war as well, in every single war. But I do find that quite interesting.
No, it's fascinating. The British government plays down all of this IRA activity so as to dampen alarm in the population, although word has very much got out. Whereas on the other side of the coin, a Nazi press plays them up in the Völkische Beobachter to boost German morale. So all seems to be going tickety-boo at this point, but without warning to their IRA contacts, the Nazis suddenly switch tactics and they undertake a massive bombing raid of Belfast on Easter Tuesday, April 1941, which completely blows the socks off the IRA. They had no idea this was coming. 180 Luftwaffe bombers attacked the Harland and Wolff shipping yard, which was a vital base for the Royal Navy. However, as we saw with Mr. Gortz's unfortunate landing, it was wildly inaccurate. Over 1,000 civilians were killed, and half the city was destroyed. This was a real dark night of the soul for Taoiseach Eamon de Valera, not least because he may have felt guilty that on the southern side of the border, the railway, which went from Dublin across the border, went up to Belfast, was not blacked out. So the idea is that this would have acted as a quite clear kind of guide for the bombers. So he possibly feels a little bit guilty about that. He sends an extra 13 fire tenders across the border to help quell the blaze. So for perhaps the only moment in the war, Ireland is united against the Nazis in this dreadful, dreadful moment. It's truly abysmal, unimaginable, the pain that the Irish people at this point were feeling. And not long after that, to add insult to injury, on the 31st of May, Dubliners, it was their turn to awake to similar damage in their city with, although less dramatic, 34 were dead, 91 were wounded, and many more left without homes. Again, we seem to have some incompetence on the German bombers' part. It's possible that they got lost and simply dumped their bombs as they were flying off over the water. They thought, why waste good ammunition? We'll just drop it here.
Well, I also think we also glaze over sometimes the fact that they didn't have like Google Maps up to see where they were going.
Quite, yeah.
They literally just had a map, and then they were looking for certain landmarks on their way and stuff. And how are you supposed to do that in the dark?
Yeah, exactly. With all the extra stuff that's going on with simply trying to fly a plane.
Yeah, I mean, there's stories on the Allied side as well. I mean, my grandfather was a radar operator in the RAF during the war, and he sort of told various stories of Allied bombers sort of taking off from the UK with the intent of going to Germany and dropping their bombs there, and then sort of flew for about half an hour, thought, we've probably gone far enough now, drop the bombs, and it turns out they ended up dropping them over England instead.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, you can't win. There's a farmer on the south coast of the UK who kind of screwed either way.
Yeah, it's not gonna go well for you either way.
No.
So in the wake of all this disaster, chaos engulfs the IRA leadership. They're confused. What's going on? Why have the Nazis done this? What's happening? So there's a bit of a kind of purge within the IRA. Hayes, who is now a sort of full-blown alcoholic and completely incapable of effective management, is scapegoated for the failures. He's court-martialed and he's forced to confess to being an Irish government spy, despite there being no evidence to back this up. He escapes to the Irish police for safety and is inevitably given 5 years in prison, but he doesn't really mind because at least he's alive. Gortz at this point is still kicking about, a bit like the Japanese soldiers who never were told that the war was over. He's sort of kicking about, completely unaware of developments, and finally gets picked up in September 1941 and arrested. So it all kind of goes up in flames, and any further hopes of collaboration are dashed when the Americans get involved in the war effort. With 32,000 American GIs stationed in Northern Ireland, this was well and truly the end of any hoped for Nazi invasion. So that kind of concludes the war itself. But after the war, there's an interesting kind of coda to this, where general anti-British feeling and some, it must be said, some anti-Semitism as well, contributes to a favourable climate for sheltering ex-Nazis or collaborators of the Nazis. And De Valera, again, here, this is an interesting, because he has 3 terms in office that are somewhat spread apart, including 2 after the war. And in the mid-50s, he is swaying back towards this quite virulent anti-British feeling and kind of almost a kind of weird nostalgia for the Nazis. So he facilitates kind of visas, all the rest of it. So I'll just run you through a few people before we move on who were sheltered. A man called Otto Skorzeny, who was SS Obersturmbannführer, which is a great word. He was Hitler's favourite commando and the most dangerous man in Europe. He pulled off a high-stakes glider rescue of Mussolini in 1943, is feted in Irish society upon his first visit in 1957. He purchases a 168-acre estate in County Kildare in 1959, and the press reports in Ireland present him as a dashing war hero in the kind of Scarlet Pimpernel mould, without any hint of repulsion. We're going to see later on similar looking back on Nazi connections in Egypt, kind of with a total lack of distaste or repulsion. So the nastiest of the bunch is undoubtedly Andrea Artukovic, who's the leader of the Croatian fascist party, the Ustasi, and he's known as the Butcher of the Balkans. He served as Nazi Minister of the Interior in the NDH, which is the independent state of Croatia, and much like democratic republics of here, there, and everywhere. The clue is if you have to put the word in the name, you probably aren't that thing. So, the very unindependent state of Croatia.
We swear we're democratic. We don't do democracy, but
exactly.
we call ourselves democratic.
Well, quite. So the independent state of Croatia, which is in no way independent, is very much a fascist puppet state of Nazi Germany. He's not a glamorous figure like Skorzeny. He's utterly brutal and a vicious anti-Semite, and launches the kind of Balkan episode of the Holocaust, which is truly brutal and awful to read about. And so it's hard to understand Irish willingness to shelter him without there being some kind of anti-Semitic element in society at large. You can understand Skorzeny; he's a dashing war hero. We could kind of forget about the uncomfortable stuff. But there's no redeeming features to Artukovic. He's a really unpleasant character. So he is secreted via the Catholic Church's quote-unquote rat lines to Rathgar in 1947 and later flees to the USA. Much like many, the Catholic Church has got its fingerprints all over this, unfortunately. In Italy, as we'll see later on, Pope Pius XII was... Hitler's Pope, was all too glad to facilitate the kind of rehabilitation of ex-Nazis, the sending them off to safe countries abroad, etc., etc. So 3 last ones quickly. Célestin Lanné is the leader of the Breton Waffen-SS unit, the Bezem Perrot, who are notorious for rooting out and torturing resistance members in Brittany. So they're a bit like the Breton nationalists, I should say, are a bit like the Basques and the Catalonians. They very much see themselves as independent identity, will do anything they can to hurt their country at large. And again, my enemy's enemy is my friend.
And there's a bit of context, Brittany is in France.
Yeah.
As well, just in case.
Yeah. So Célestin Lanné is a pretty nasty character and no friend of the Resistance. And so he is again one who finds himself in Ireland after the war. Peter Menton, a Dutch businessman responsible for the murder of hundreds of Jews, also finds his way there, as well as Albert Loix, a Flemish collaborator who fled to Ireland in 1948 and remarkably became a fully fledged Irish citizen in 1954. So that concludes part 1 of my TED Talk. Thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we might just do a little reset before I launch into part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought like that was really interesting. I mean, with certain countries, especially when they declare kind of neutrality, I feel like you can almost view them as this kind of like almost like a Switzerland, because Switzerland is like the neutral country of all neutral countries. So we kind of just see that word and think, oh, well, they just sat it out completely. Yeah. But it actually turns out that in a lot of situations that there's more under
neutral
the surface.
Doesn't necessarily mean neutral. Yeah.
But also evidenced by the fact that Dublin got bombed, and even if it wasn't intentional, it still happened.
Yeah, of course.
That kind of incident didn't happen in like Switzerland or
precisely
Sweden, for instance.
They were far more neutral than was Ireland.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, we can talk about at some point like kind of the Swedish neutrality and the fact that they were almost kind of still bullied into giving Germans their like resources and access to kind of ferry their troops through the country, as well as just not joining any factions. But yeah, super interesting, really cool.
Thank you. Well, I think on that note, I think you're going to tell us at some point about the Scandinavian countries and their interesting resistance movements and some of the curious things.
Some cool stories.
Some interesting stories there.
Yeah, but on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode. So thank you very much for listening, and join us in the next one.
Thank you. A young private Adolf Hitler admires the Muslim forces of the Ottoman army. He doesn't trust many non-German populations, but the Muslims are one he fully gets behind, and he says, right, we can form brigades, we can give them arms, all the rest of it. They turn to Muslims in the Caucasus, in Crimea, in Azerbaijan, in Turkmenistan, Georgia, Armenia.
Well, even within Russia, there's still like a significant Muslim population.
Well, precisely. So the British appoint Amin al-Husseini He starts out as a cooperative player in the region, but soon turns on the British, organising resistance to both them and the incoming Jewish migration to Palestine. Hitler receives the Mufti with great pomp. The Mufti uses this opportunity, quite intelligently, to say, now, Mr. Hitler, this is all very well and good, we agree on lots of things, but what are you going to do about Palestine?